The wild frontier of 1850s America was not merely a place on a map. It was a crucible, a brutal proving ground where civilizations clashed, and the very notion of survival was redefined daily. In this untamed expanse, a man named Nelson Lee, a restless soul nearing 50, was about to step into a nightmare from which few returned. His story, drawn from the chilling pages of his memoir, 3 Years Among the Comanches, is not just a tale of personal endurance. It is a raw, unflinching glimpse into the heart of the Comanche Empire, a formidable, enigmatic force that held the southern plains in a vice grip of power and fear. Picture a world where the land itself pulses with danger, where every rustle of the wind might signal an ambush, and every horizon holds the promise of both fortune and unspeakable horror. This was the Great Plains, stretching from modern-day Kansas down to the scorching deserts of Texas and New Mexico. Here, Native American tribes, pushed to their breaking point by the relentless tide of westward expansion, fought back with a ferocity born of desperation. Raiding parties, shadows in the night, swept down on border settlements, a defiant fist raised against the encroaching wave of settlers. It was into this volatile cauldron that Lee, a man shaped by the very frontier he now dared to challenge, unwittingly walked. Lee was no stranger to the smell of gunpowder or the bite of the wild. A former sailor, a veteran of the Texas Rangers, and a participant in the bloody Mexican-American War that redrew the map of the United States, he carried the grit of a survivor in his bones. After the war, he had tried to settle near Corpus Christi, dabbling in cattle trading and capturing wild horses, a modest life perhaps, but one still tethered to the untamed edge of civilization. Yet it was here, on the fringes of settled life, that his path irrevocably veered into the domain of the Comanche. To truly grasp Nelson Lee's ordeal, you must first understand the Comanche. They were not just another nomadic tribe. They were a force of nature, an unparalleled cavalry that had bent the Great Plains to their will for centuries. Before the Spanish introduced horses in the 1500s, the Comanche were a shadow of their future selves, often overshadowed by groups like the Apache. But the arrival of the horse sparked a revolution, transforming them into the undisputed lords of the southern plains, a dominance that spanned nearly 2 centuries. By the 1800s, they were the most feared and respected native power in the Southwest. Unlike the semi-agricultural Apache, who adopted horses but clung to their farming ways, the Comanche fully embraced the nomadic horse culture. It became the bedrock of their existence, their economy, their warfare, their identity. They moved across the vast plains like ghosts, covering hundreds of miles in days, striking with a lightning speed that left their enemies reeling. Their raids, often cloaked by the cover of night, targeted settlers, travelers, and rival tribes with devastating precision, offering little chance for defense. But the Comanche story is not solely one of violence. It is a testament to resilience. Their rise to power came after centuries of being pushed to the margins by other tribes. By the 19th century, this collective memory of displacement fueled their fierce resistance to external threats. Their way of life, a finely tuned balance of adaptation and survival, was under constant siege, yet they fought to preserve it with every fiber of their being. As Lee's story unfolds, keep in mind that his personal hell was a microcosm of a much larger struggle, a clash of cultures, a narrative of native strength, and a chilling window into the complexities of the frontier. In 1855, Nelson Lee and his friend William Aiken hatched a plan as audacious as it was utterly insane: to drive a herd of mules westward from Corpus Christi to a place Lee vaguely called Matamoros. While no historical map pinpoints this elusive California town, one truth was terrifyingly clear. Their chosen route cut straight through the bleeding heart of Comanche territory. Maps of the era often mark this region explicitly as perilous, even impassable for settlers. Yet Aiken, blinded by the promise of substantial profits, believed they could navigate it safely, a belief rooted more in reckless optimism than in any shred of logic. The Great Plains were not just a geographical feature. They were the sacred sovereign domain of the Comanche, fiercely guarded by a people who had mastered its every nuance for generations. Heedless of the unspoken warnings carried on the wind, Lee and Aiken assembled a small crew of hired men, loaded up their horses, and began driving their mules westward along the Rio Grande. Lee, ever the pragmatist, purchased a state-of-the-art pocket watch, a rare and costly marvel for its time. This watch, with its intricate chime, was more than a timepiece. It symbolized his desperate attempt to impose order on the chaos, to regiment their journey with rigid discipline. At precisely 3:30 a.m. each day, the watch would signal the grueling start of their trek, a relentless push to maximize daylight hours and outrun the unspoken dangers. The journey began in early March, a slow, methodical crawl westward. The Rio Grande, with its life-giving stretches of grassland, provided a vital resource for their mules, the engine of their expedition. But even with meticulous planning, their decision to willingly enter Comanche territory revealed a profound, almost suicidal misunderstanding of the lurking dangers. By April, they reached a point southwest of El Paso, a logical spot to rest their weary mules. Well-fed, rested animals were essential for the grueling miles ahead. But this pause, deep within the Comanche's hunting grounds, was a calculated gamble, one they would soon lose. Sentinels were posted each night, their eyes scanning the darkness, their rifles at the ready. Yet against the Comanche, masters of stealth and ambush, their vigilance was ultimately futile. The raiders, like specters, knew every fold of the land, every whisper of the wind, making them an invisible threat until it was far too late. For Lee and his companions, their journey into Comanche territory was not just a logistical challenge, it was an unwitting act of defiance against a tribe whose dominance over the southern plains was absolute. What happened next would etch itself into Lee's memory, a brutal testament to the peril of underestimating the Comanche's power. April 2nd, 1855. The stillness of the night was a deceptive lull before the storm. Around 1 a.m., Nelson Lee finished his patrol, wound his precious watch, and settled down to rest, blissfully unaware that his world was about to shatter. The camp, quiet moments before, erupted in a symphony of blood-curdling screams. In the faint flickering light of the campfire, Lee caught fragmented glimpses of dark, painted figures, shadows made real, moving with terrifying speed and purpose through the chaos. It was a Comanche raid. The sentinels, caught completely off guard or perhaps already silenced, offered no warning. Before Lee could react, a rough lasso cinched around him, dragging him to the ground. In seconds, he was bound, helpless, as the camp dissolved into pandemonium. Shouts, chilling war, whoops, and the sickening thud of tomahawks filled the air as the raiders moved methodically, tent to tent. When the dust settled, only 4 men remained alive: Nelson Lee, William Aiken, and 2 hired hands, Thomas Martin and John Stewart. The others had met a brutal, nameless end. The survivors were stripped of their clothing and outfitted in traditional Comanche garb: buckskin leggings, rough hunting shirts. As the raiders plundered the camp, they stumbled upon Lee's pocket watch, a strange, intricate object in their world. Fascinated, they demanded Lee demonstrate its purpose. When it chimed, their astonishment was palpable. Lee, always quick-witted, seized the moment. He solemnly wound the watch, making it chime again, deliberately infusing it with mystery and reverence. He later wrote that he believed the Comanche saw the watch as something supernatural, perhaps linked to the Great Spirit. It was a desperate gamble, but for now it earned him a moment of awe, perhaps even a sliver of safety. Daylight, when it finally arrived, unveiled the full, gruesome horror of the raid. Lee's description is chilling: bodies mutilated in the most barbaric ways, disemboweled, scalped, left as stark, terrifying warnings. Fresh scalps, still gleaming with blood, hung from the warriors' belts, a grim testament to their absolute dominance over the region. For Lee and his companions, the journey into captivity was an immediate, harrowing initiation into the Comanche's methods of psychological and physical control. To instill primal fear, the captors would feign scalping, brandishing bloody tomahawks, grabbing at the captive's hair, and mimicking the act of scalping, only to stop at the last, agonizing moment. These acts were not mere cruelty. They were calculated displays of power, stark reminders of the captive's utter powerlessness. Travel with the Comanche was an ordeal designed to break the human spirit. Faces were covered with deer skins, with tiny holes cut for minimal breathing. Bound hand and foot, they were strapped to mules. If a captive fell, they dangled helplessly, legs still tied to the animal, a grotesque puppet show for their captor's amusement. Lee recounted how his involuntary somersaults off the mule became a source of raucous laughter and mocking jeers. Even meals were acts of intimidation. Boiling chunks of horseflesh were hurled at the captives, scalding their skin as they scrambled for the searing morsels. This macabre ritual was as much about dominance as it was about sustenance, a relentless assault on their dignity. Nights offered no respite. The captives were stretched out on their backs, hands and feet tied to stakes, with buffalo hides secured around their throats, leaving them immobile, sleepless, and in constant torment. While Lee's account vividly captures the terror and brutality he endured, it's crucial to understand the broader context. The Comanche's actions, horrifying to settlers, were deeply rooted in their struggle for survival and dominance in a rapidly changing world. A people who had faced displacement and marginalization before their rise to power, their fierce resistance to settlers was a continuation of their fight to protect their way of life. The raid was not merely an act of violence, it was a strategic assertion of control over their territory. By instilling such profound fear, the Comanche sent an unmistakable message to outsiders. Their land was not to be crossed without severe consequence. Nelson Lee's harrowing account plunges deeper into the grim realities of his captivity. After days of relentless, brutal travel, the Comanche subjected their captives to unimaginable physical and psychological torment. Lee vividly describes being forced to lie flat on his back, arms and legs stretched taut and bound tightly to stakes driven into the earth. To ensure complete immobilization, a buffalo hide was tied under his chin, anchoring his neck to the ground. This cruel restraint left him utterly helpless, a living straitjacket that robbed him of rest, adding layers of agony to his torment. These conditions persisted for 4 grueling days. When not bound in this torturous manner, Lee and the other captives faced equally dehumanizing treatment. Blindfolded and tied to mules, they endured treacherous rides, often falling as branches and rugged terrain knocked them loose. Lee recounts how the Comanche delighted in his misfortune, treating his somersaults off the mule as crude entertainment. Even eating became a tool of humiliation. Boiling chunks of horse meat were flung at them, scalding their skin as they desperately scrambled for the searing morsels. This relentless cycle of physical discomfort and mocking cruelty underscored their captors' absolute dominance. On the 4th day, the captives arrived at what Lee described as a sprawling Comanche village. Though his estimate of 500 people and hundreds of tents might have been amplified by fear and awe, the sheer scale was undeniable. They were paraded through the camp, a spectacle for the villagers, before being brought before the formidable Chief Big Wolf. This leader, whose name resonated with raw power and mystique, had heard whispers of Lee's peculiar pocket watch and demanded to witness its strange function. Lee's response revealed both his quick wit and desperation. Declaring that making the watch chime at that moment would wreck the world, Lee cleverly leveraged the Comanche's spiritual reverence for the unknown to avoid immediate harm. While Big Wolf seemed skeptical, he refrained from pressing the issue. A fragile moment of reprieve for Lee, but the respite was agonizingly brief. Lee was soon dragged outside the village, where a ritual of terror awaited. His fellow captives, Akin, Martin, and Stewart, were already there, stripped and bound. They were tied to tall posts, their hands raised high by ropes. Martin and Stewart stood side by side, while Akin was positioned opposite them. Lee, too, was stripped and tied alongside Akin, completing the grim tableau. What followed was a horrifying display of Comanche warrior culture. In a chilling, choreographed procession, warriors carrying tomahawks, knives, and flint spearheads circled the captives. The ceremony began with 2 warriors stepping forward to scalp Martin and Stewart, removing small, silver dollar-sized patches of skin. Though still alive, the 2 men bled profusely, their cries echoing through the clearing. The warriors continued their macabre dance, letting out chilling war whoops as they passed. They brandished their weapons, raking flint spearheads across Martin and Stewart's bodies. Wounds accumulated with each cycle, leaving the men bloodied and broken. The torment was systematic and unrelenting. The the warriors seemingly drawing strength and purpose from the act. Lee and Akin, to their astonishment, were left untouched during the ordeal. The warriors passed by them multiple times, sparing them while focusing their cruelty on Martin and Stuart. Lee later reflected on the scene with words that captured the horror. How many times they circled round, halting the sound of war whoop and going through the same demonic exercise, I cannot tell. The psychological strain of witnessing such calculated violence, compounded by the terrifying uncertainty of his own fate, left an indelible scar on Lee's mind. To the bewildered settlers, these acts seemed nothing but unprovoked savagery. But within the context of Comanche culture, such rituals served a deeper, chilling purpose. These displays of dominance and brutality were not random acts of violence. They were visceral affirmations of power, unity, and control for a people who had endured centuries of displacement and marginalization. Asserting such authority over captives symbolized a profound reversal of roles, a way to reclaim agency in a world rapidly encroaching upon them. For Lee, however, the ceremony marked his descent into a living nightmare. His survival hung by a thread, dependent on both his captors' whims and his fragile ability to navigate their complex social and spiritual codes. The torment inflicted by the Comanche on Nelson Lee and his fellow captives reached its horrific crescendo as the ritual continued. Lee described the scene with haunting clarity. They assisted in a hellish work until every inch of the bodies of the unhappy men was hacked and covered with clotted blood. For Lee, the ordeal was so unbearable that he longed to choose his own death rather than endure the relentless, sadistic cruelty of the Comanche. This harrowing episode underscores the profound psychological and cultural dimensions of the Comanche's rituals. As author S.C. Gwynne notes in Empire of the Summer Moon, the Comanche did not shy away from inflicting suffering, they embraced it. Gwynne writes, not only did they inflict horrific suffering, but by all evidence they enjoyed it. Making people scream in pain was fun for them. It was an important part of their adult culture, and one they accepted without challenge. Between acts of unimaginable violence, the Comanche would pause, seemingly to savor the moment, smoking tobacco and openly mocking their captives. They jeered at Martin for daring to pray and pointed out the gruesome injuries inflicted on him and Stuart. But the intermission was fleeting, and the ceremony resumed with a chilling war dance. Two warriors circled the captives before drawing their hatchets and delivering fatal blows to Martin and Stuart, crushing their skulls in brutal, instantaneous flashes. The bodies were discarded without ceremony, leaving Lee and Akin bound, braced, and convinced their own deaths were imminent. Yet to their astonishment, the ritual abruptly ended. They were spared for reasons Lee could not fathom. The psychological toll of witnessing such barbarity scarred Lee deeply, but he clung to the faint, flickering hope of survival. His pocket watch, still revered by the Comanche as a supernatural object, became an unexpected tool of leverage. As Akin later advised, Lee's cooperation and the mystical aura of the watch could ensure his agonizing existence. Akin told him they believed it to be a living spirit in a silver body. This chilling insight became Lee's fragile lifeline. Akin, however, would not share Lee's fate. Sent to another camp, he offered a brief, whispered farewell, leaving Lee with his invaluable parting wisdom. From that moment, Lee never saw or heard of Akin again, and he was presumed dead. For Lee, the years ahead would be a brutal test of survival, resilience, and a relentless, burning determination to escape. Over the next 3 agonizing years, Lee lived with various Comanche tribes. His pocket watch continued to command a strange, almost superstitious respect, traveling with him and maintaining its status as a mystical object. Following Akin's desperate advice, Lee adapted to his nightmarish circumstances, becoming a servant to Big Wolf and other tribal leaders. He performed tasks as needed, slowly earning a grudging trust. Eventually, he was allowed to move unbound within the camp and even carry a knife, a significant, almost unimaginable shift in his status. Big Wolf's tribe bestowed upon Lee a chilling nickname, Chumako, meaning the good white man. While Lee's relationship with the tribe varied, he still faced moments of casual cruelty, particularly from a brutal master named Spotted Leopard, who severely injured him after a failed escape attempt. Yet amidst the darkness, fleeting moments of humanity shone through. Women in the tribe, such as a Comanche named Sleek Otter, offered quiet kindness and even protection from the unpredictable wrath of the warriors. Lee's opportunity for freedom came during a journey with a chief named Rolling Thunder. Ironically, the trip aimed to address the growing threat of white settlers encroaching on Comanche territory. Sensing his chance, fueled by a primal surge of desperation, Lee seized a hatchet. In his own words, etched with the raw power of his memoir, snatching the hatchet in that instant from its place, I leapt toward the chief and buried the dull edge of a broad hand's breadth into his brain. With the chief incapacitated, Lee, driven by a sudden, desperate surge of adrenaline, armed himself with a rifle and knife, mounted a horse, and vanished into the unforgiving wilderness. His escape marked the end of a 3-year ordeal, a testament to his raw resilience and remarkable resourcefulness. Nelson Lee's escape was more than a dash for freedom. It was a brutal, grueling battle of endurance, a profound triumph of will against overwhelming odds. He seized his fleeting moment of liberty with bold resolve, writing, "A moment sufficed to draw the rifle from beneath him and jerk the long knife from his girdle. Then mounting his horse, I dashed wildly away over an unknown path toward the land of freedom." His desperate flight marked the beginning of a harrowing journey through an unforgiving wilderness as he sought sanctuary in the distant Mexican state of Chihuahua. Navigating the vast, rugged, and merciless terrain of the Southwest was no small feat. Lee faced natural barriers at every turn, towering cliffs, treacherous mountains, and dense, tangled brush that forced him to double back repeatedly, each lost step a nail in his coffin. Signs of other native groups kept him on high alert, a constant gnawing fear that his survival depended on avoiding further capture. By day, he relied on the blazing sun to guide him southward. By night, the North Star became his solitary compass. Yet even with his innate resourcefulness, the profound isolation and the brutal, unyielding landscape began to take their inevitable toll. Weeks into his escape, Lee's physical and emotional strength waned, replaced by crushing weariness. He described his deteriorating condition in haunting, despairing terms. "I was sick in body as well as soul. My limbs had become swollen, and the wounds and bruises that covered me were inflamed and painful. Day by day, I grew weaker as I advanced. Often I prayed God that when I fell asleep, I might never wake up again." These words capture the profound, agonizing despair he faced, cut off from civilization, consumed by doubt, and unsure if he would survive another dawn. After nearly a month on the run, even Lee's horse, his vital companion and last tether to hope, succumbed to exhaustion. Forced to abandon the magnificent animal, he pressed on foot, the weight of his predicament crushing him. He wrote with a heartbreaking sense of defeat, "Now for the first time, my heart died within me. For all I could discover, civilization was as far off as when I started the journey. I began to doubt myself, to fear that I'd become crazed." Alone, weakened and teetering on the edge of madness, Lee pushed forward, driven by sheer, unadulterated determination. The wilderness itself seemed to conspire against him. Rattlesnakes, their chilling rattle a constant reminder of danger, and unseen predators stalked the shadows, drawn by the scent of his kills after desperate hunts. Even the essential act of building a fire, to cook meager meals, to ward off the bone-chilling cold, became a deadly liability. The flames, visible from afar, could attract attention, could lead to his recapture, or worse. Comanche patrols or other hostile groups could easily discover his location. To mitigate this terrifying risk, Lee used natural features like towering cliffs and thick brush to obscure the light, turning survival into a delicate, agonizing balance of necessity and concealment. Despite these relentless challenges, Lee demonstrated remarkable ingenuity and near superhuman resilience. His ability to navigate the brutal terrain, constantly evade detection, and somehow sustain himself amidst overwhelming adversity speaks volumes about his primal survival instincts and his unyielding, desperate hope for freedom. Yet as the agonizing journey wore on, it became clear that he was fighting a losing battle against his own body as much as the elements. Lee's escape is not just a tale of raw physical endurance, but a profound, almost spiritual testament to the strength of the human spirit in the face of crushing odds. The southwestern wilderness, with its harsh, desolate beauty and relentless, hidden dangers, became both his prison and his ultimate proving ground. Every agonizing step forward was an act of defiance against despair, a refusal to surrender to the forces that sought to break him, to erase him. As we follow Lee's journey, we see not only the extraordinary resilience of one man, but also the stark, brutal reality of survival on the frontier, a reality shaped by an unforgiving landscape and the simmering, violent tension between settlers and native tribes fighting for their existence. For Lee, this journey was more than a physical escape. It was a desperate, ultimate test of his will to live. On the 56th day of his grueling, soul-crushing escape, Nelson Lee's fate took a miraculous turn. Resting in an open, desolate prairie, his heart pounded as he was startled by the sharp crack of a rifle shot echoing across the barren landscape. Gripping his rifle, he braced for another inevitable encounter with potential captors, his mind racing through escape scenarios. But to his immense relief, the figures approaching were not Comanche warriors. They were a group of Mexican hunters, identifiable by their wide-brimmed sombreros, their forms silhouetted against the vast sky. They were hunting deer, a mundane act that would become Lee's salvation. Lee later recounted a simple act of compassion that would forever alter his trajectory. The group, heading home to San Fernando, likely near modern-day Chihuahua, quickly recognized Lee's dire skeletal condition. Emaciated, unshaven, and unrecognizable after 3 brutal years of captivity, Lee was a shadow of the man who had once traversed the American frontier. Compassionate and practical, the hunters took him in without hesitation. They offered life's most basic, precious essentials: cool water, nourishing food, and a horse to ride. For a man who had survived on scraps and raw, animalistic determination, the gesture was as nourishing to his spirit as to his starved body. The journey to San Fernando took a week, during which the Mexicans shared their limited resources with Lee, offering what little they had without question or hesitation. For the first time in years, he could eat without fear, drink without rationing, and rest without being hunted. The simple, profound kindness of these strangers was a stark contrast to the relentless hostility he had faced in captivity. Once in San Fernando, Lee was taken under the care of a local doctor. For 6 precious weeks, he remained there, slowly regaining strength and recovering from the profound physical and emotional toll of his ordeal. His festering wounds were treated, his starved body nourished, and his tormented mind finally given space to process the incredible, nightmarish journey he had endured. When Lee boarded a boat bound for New York, it marked the end of 3 long, harrowing years. Years that had stretched into an eternity. His time among the Comanche, defined by brutal captivity, desperate survival, and a near miraculous escape, was over. The journey northward was not just a return to familiar territory, it was a profound, symbolic crossing back into a life of freedom and safety, far from the brutal landscapes of the frontier that had nearly claimed him. Lee's story is not only a testament to human resilience and the unyielding spirit of survival, but also a poignant reminder of the humanity that can shine through, even in the harshest, most desolate circumstances. The selfless generosity of the Mexican hunters, their quiet willingness to save a stranger on the brink of death, ensured that Nelson Lee could live to tell his extraordinary tale. A story of survival, endurance, and the indomitable will to return home. In 1858, Nelson Lee stood once again on the familiar, hallowed ground of the East Coast, a world away from the harsh, untamed frontier where he had endured unimaginable trials. Reflecting on his arduous, nightmarish journey, Lee wrote with haunting duality, "I was home at last, and my adventures with the Indians were at an end forever. Although I would never forget the awful scenes of agony and torture I'd witnessed among them." His words capture the profound relief of his return to safety, intertwined with the chilling, permanent imprint of the memories he would carry to his grave. Lee's escape from the clutches of the Comanche and his return to civilization were not just the culmination of years of brutal struggle, they marked the beginning of an unexpected new chapter. Settling into the relative calm of the East Coast, he no longer faced the constant specter of violence. the ever-present threat of death that had defined his every waking moment on the frontier. The deep, lingering trauma of captivity, the agonizing loss of his companions, and the brutal realities of life among the Comanche remained etched in his mind, a permanent scar on his soul. Determined to ensure his harrowing experiences were not forgotten, Lee undertook the daunting task of writing his memoir, 3 Years Among the Comanches. The book was not just a raw, unfiltered recounting of his personal survival, but a vivid, chilling chronicle of life on the untamed frontier. It offered readers a rare, terrifying glimpse into the violent cultural collision between encroaching settlers and fiercely defensive native tribes, the brutal, dehumanizing dynamics of captivity, and the near-superhuman resilience required to endure such unspeakable hardships. Lee's story resonated deeply in a nation grappling with relentless westward expansion and the violent conflicts it sparked. Lee's journey from agonizing captivity to hard-won freedom embodies the profound complexities of the 19th century American frontier, a land of vast opportunity, unimaginable danger, and intricate, often deadly cultural entanglements. His narrative reflects not only his extraordinary personal strength, but also the broader, seething tensions between settlers and native tribes during this tumultuous, transformative period. While his return to the East Coast marked the end of his physical trials, it also symbolized his profound transition from a participant in the raw, violent realities of the West to a chronicler of its harrowing stories. In his memoir, Nelson Lee ensured that the voices of his lost companions, the harsh, unforgiving beauty of the landscape, and even the brutal practices of his Comanche captors would live on, whispered through the pages of history. His survival and the enduring legacy of his writing serve as a powerful, haunting reminder of the profound human will to endure, to survive against all odds, and the critical importance of preserving the stories of those who lived through history's most challenging, most terrifying moments.